What's up, guys? I stay out of politics very, very deliberately, very intentionally. You very rarely hear me talk politics. I'm not extraordinarily politically informed. In DC, that's like a crime, because it really, I bartended, I say this all the time, for a minute. And I bartended at some really, I guess you could say, certain higher up establishments. And I would say, just when I'm behind the bar listening to conversations, I'd say like a good 40% of the time people are talking politics. And so this is a very political town. We are a 16-mile radius town. I live 1.5 miles from the White House. But I stay clear of politics because I don't really believe in them. That's the reason. I feel like it's like a fairy tale. I feel it's almost like it's like make believe. It's not really real. And I know that, you guys are going to be like, oh, that's crazy. That sounds crazy. But that's just how I feel. From the information that I do have, from the knowledge that I do have, I don't really believe that it's real. I try my best not to make assumptions because I don't like assumptions made about me. If somebody were to ask me how I feel about the mayor of Washington, D.C., or Joe Biden, the president, I have my opinions, but I don't know these people personally. I know that both of them have one person in common that's a very nefarious, extraordinarily corrupt, nefarious individual, and they both know him very well, and are, friends/associates with this individual. However, I don't know the extent of what they know about this individual. As far as certain decisions that our mayor has made about COVID, I will, as much as people may be critical of her, I will say that she's made some decisions that have really been, in my opinion, in the best interest of the people. So I will definitely tip my hat to her for that. But I stay clear of politics because, like I said, I really don't believe in politics. But I was forced to recently analyze this issue again. So this will be the second time that I've kind of touched on this issue of defund the police and how I feel about it. And I will say this, that my perspective 5 years ago, 10 years ago would have probably been very different, very, very, very different than it is now with the experiences that I've had and, things that I only had read about in books that I might have chalked it up to this idea of, oh, this is conspiracy theory, hogwash, until it actually happened to me, until I saw things like from a very real perspective, until I saw things that in this town that were going on that were so indecent, immoral, and corrupt. I had to say, time out. These things aren't just conspiracy theorists. These aren't just conspiracy theorist statements. And so I did some writing recently for a class about defund the police. I'm going to share with you guys what I wrote. And again, with politics, my personal belief system is that with politics, with the political game, it's a dirty game. And I don't think that you can get to a certain level without getting your hands dirty. And again, I'm not somebody, because I detest when people make assumptions about me and don't have all the information. So I'm trying my best, after being a recipient of people making a lot of assumptions and, a recipient of gossip and very, malicious catty talk. I try my best not to apply that to people if I don't know them personally. I don't know the details of their life personally, because it's bad karma. Regardless, just making things up about people is bad karma. But that's the way I feel generally about politics and politicians. I don't believe that you can really be too deep in the game without having gotten your hands dirty to some degree. You likely will have to do business with very corrupt people. And the interesting part about it is in America, and I had this conversation with with my oldest brother, who had to let me know, how far are you going to go with this? How far do you want to take this? And I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, if you get a job and you work for a company, work for a corporation, are you going to research every single CEO, every single executive, every single, owner of the company who has stake in the company to find out every detail of their life and how moral they are? Because he's like, I guarantee you'll never work if you go to that extent. You'll never work because you're gonna find people that are you're always gonna have that oh, this company is in partnership with this company that does animal testing, or this company is, partnered with a person who has done this kind of crime. This is America. So just the very fact that we're living on American soil, how far do we want to go with this? How extreme are we going to get with this? And I think that that's really a good, thing to take into consideration. And so with this conversation of defund the police, I'm mostly in agreement and in support of those who have demanded to defund the police. Mostly in agreement with it. Because of political corruption and systemic racism, law enforcement has lost the trust and credibility of the people. And when I say law enforcement, I'm making a really big generalization, but I'm going to go a little bit deeper into the way that I feel about this. I know that law enforcement works in cahoots with the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, to target innocent civilians. They don't exclusively target innocent civilians, but they do target innocent civilians. And they've done so for a long time. And anybody who exposes this on some level likely will be targeted and likely will be labeled as a conspiracy theorist. And so, living in DC, having witnessed this absolute political corruption, it's been astonishing. It's been very eye-opening. And the fact that United States citizens' tax-paying dollars are also going to the salaries who target innocent civilians and attempt to criminalize non-criminals is unconstitutional. It is unethical, it is immoral, and it is illegal. But when you deal with a government that feels that they are above the law, they do these types of things all the time. And so I'm going to start by making this one point that what is the law? The law is really only as good as the virtue of the individuals that are responsible for upholding the law. When the law can be applied to some and overlooked for others, what good is law? And I will revisit that point in a minute. And so I agree with our mayor who has decided to cut back on police funding, Mayor Bowser. She's also made quite a few decisions that have gone unnoticed that have been in favor of the people. And I want people to be able to not just ask the right questions, but also look at people and their characters with a more discerning eye. We can't make blanket statements and say somebody's all bad or all good. And I know that there's a lot of criticism about our mayor in Washington, D.C., but we have to be, if we want people to judge us fairly, I personally don't even want to be judged, but if we want people to judge us fairly, we have to be able to be equally as critical of the decisions that they make that we are not in favor of, as well as things that they've done that are actually really good things, you know? So she's done a few things that are really, in my opinion, in favor of the people, and we're very critical of her. But she's made some really tough decisions to prove that she has been considerate of the struggle of the everyday man, especially during COVID and certain decisions that she's made in response to this pandemic. So the way that law enforcement is structured, individual officers have very limited say. Their assignments aren't typically negotiable. Similar to the people in the military, they are trained to do what they're told and to not ask questions. In addition, the criteria for one to become a law enforcement officer does not require a high level of education. The main reason that people have acknowledged that the system that we have become accustomed to needs revamping is because we see very little difference between now and the trans-American slave trade. Mass incarceration is big business. There are people who have become wealthy just from investing in privatized prisons. The racial discrepancies between those who are incarcerated are blatant. If Black people only make up 13% of the American population, then why are they making up nearly 40 to 50% of the incarcerated population? Because we live in a society that has criminalized poverty. If there was a more fit or fair economic disbursement, I guarantee you that crime would go down within certain communities. As much attention that's been placed on crime and law enforcement in this idea of justice. What is justice? What does that really mean? Justice, in my opinion, is imaginary. It's imaginary. It's a fairy tale because the rich get away with murder, literally. And there hasn't been very much talk on the political end about reparations. Many politicians have just dismissed it. And I find it very insulting when I hear the conversation come up and you just see like this sinister smile as if like it's so out of the question. Like, when are they going to stop talking about reparations? And everybody's like, well, you know, the Japanese like got their reparations for internment camps, and Jewish people got reparations 10 billion plus. I said 8 billion. They were like, that's it? No, okay, you're totally off with that. It's been way more than 8 billion. And it was justified, and they should have gotten that money for the Holocaust. Nobody's saying that your oppression is not worth you being compensated reparations, but the question is, why have the descendants of slaves, why is that out of the question when everybody else has gotten reparations? And as much as they love to target the poor, they don't want to have a conversation about this. And they say, well, there's social programs, there's social services, but the average person that is on social services is a white woman. And every other community gets set-asides because we want to talk, oh, well, race shouldn't matter, it's one love. It's one love, but the Jewish community wasn't reaching out to the other people who have been oppressed to share their reparations. The Japanese community wasn't reaching out to the other people who have been oppressed to share their reparations. They invested it within their community. They built businesses. They even set up their own banks, their own schools. They became economically empowered with the money that they were given. Meanwhile, you got a group of people who are living in poverty, and their ancestors built this country, and people want to just ignore that fact. So we're discussing the criminal justice system and law enforcement officers whose jobs are literally to enforce the law, but we haven't discussed the fact that the wealth gap was created from doing things that are now outlawed, like owning people and making them work for free. So now we want to uphold these standards of the law and enforce the law now that it's convenient, after over 400 years of doing everything that's now against the law, and people becoming generationally wealthy from illegal activity that a certain people's ancestors produced free labor for. And if we want to take it back even further to the Native Americans who did also receive reparations, the actuality of how this country was obtained, everything was against the law. Killing, robbing, stealing, raping, plummeting, all the things that are considered very uncivilized and illegal in contemporary society. But in the foundation of our country, this is the root in the foundation of our country. So now that we have this ethical dilemma that nobody really wants to discuss, we've become very historically lazy and short-sighted when we discuss how we got here, because nobody really wants to go into that. People just want to deal with the now, but people don't want to really dissect how did we get to this point. And the truth is that people don't want to talk about it because they're happy with the unfair privilege and advantage of the crimes that were committed in order for them to have access to the wealth and power that they have in real time. The descendants of criminals are now making the rules and moseying around pretending like there's any justice in the things that they do. There's no justice. And this is the reason why we generally don't respect law enforcement, because they're upholding and abiding by laws that have only been enforced as of lately. So now that the elites have everything that they want, now they can act in a civil and moral and ethical manner. And bottom line is, law enforcement doesn't work to protect and serve the people like they say. Law enforcement works for the people who write them their check, and they do not bite the hand that feeds them. No matter how wrong or immoral or racist or bigoted their assignments they may be, they still abide generally. And they don't ask questions. And I used to get really upset about this in my younger years, and now I've kind of come to the acceptance, and not from an apathetic perspective, but from a realistic perspective. And the truth is that once you are able to self-govern, the idea of government becomes, less, you give them a little bit less power. So as far as the people that make the calls or call the shots, the idea of spiritual law or morality or any sense of human decency is seldom taken into consideration. The reason why is because why stop your abuse of power when you don't see any negative consequences or ramifications? The system has allowed you to be corrupt, and your corruption has actually gotten you places. It's actually opened doors for you. Your corruption has advanced your career, so you really don't see any incentive in stopping it, which is why the slogan "Defund the Police" is a slogan that I like more than Black Lives Matter, because the first word is defund, and that sounds like a command to me, because no one thinks in a sense of human decency, or the violation of human rights isn't really taken into consideration. It appears as if people will actually do anything for money. So defunding seems like the solution when jobs get lost and power gets taken away from those who abuse their power. And those that they believed, those that believed that they were above the law are now subjugated to the laws that they ignored. In real life, consequences are applied to poor decisions. Ignorance of the law is no escape of the consequences of illegal activity being applied. So as an adult, we have the capability of making decisions. And if you make decisions to engage in criminal activity for your fiscal advancement, then you will have to do the time because you did the crime. And I've given up on the inkling of hope that these people will have any sense of conscience or morality. I think that they're too far gone. So the only solution is to hit them where it will be most impactful, you got to sock it to their pockets. The money that they worship is the money that will be taken from them. Those in compliance, whether they were at the top masterminding the plan or at the bottom enforcing the plan. But those who didn't think twice about cooperating to take someone else's freedom will get their freedom taken away. Because the corrupt system has always worked for them, they have failed to consider their limitation of power. Their delusion of grandeur has not served them because they overestimated the power that they believe that they could get away with anything. Like such a blatant abuse of it and pure and utter corruption because they have always gotten away with it. They never once considered that all the things that they've been doing would one day catch up to them. And it's not like they haven't had the opportunity to correct the error of their ways. This isn't coming from good intention, and this isn't coming from ignorance. Ignorance in a certain sense of them not recognizing that there would be a price to pay one day. That was ignorant and very short-sighted, but they were very well aware of what they were doing. Which is why the mercy that they're asking for, or the compassion that they're asking for, when they didn't extend mercy and they didn't extend any compassion, and they were very willing, very, very willing to carry out very wicked and evil things, not caring on how that would impact somebody's psyche, the level of trauma that they would induce, the disunification of people's families. They were very willing to do those things. And so to ask for compassion now that you got caught, now that the tables have turned, now that it's time for you to get consequences for your actions, I don't see that being I don't see that extension. I don't see that courtesy or compassion being extended. So they were not ignorant to how wrong it was to do the things that they've been doing. When we analyze mass incarceration, we have to also dig deep into the destruction of the family unit. Every father thrown in jail, that's a child that's fatherless. That's a single mother that's left in poverty, forced to do what she can to put food on the table. The trickle-down effect is tremendous, and the people that enforce these laws do it absent-mindedly or carelessly, or, without unconscientiously, or really deliberately. I believe that some of them do it actually to enjoy it. I think they actually really enjoy witnessing the destruction of a family. It's very sadistic. But let's not forget that law enforcement, as we know it today, is more or less a replication of those who were assigned to ride on the horses' backs and whip the slaves if they were not picking cotton fast enough. The structure of law enforcement derives directly from those who were riding on those horses, telling slaves to do what the slave masters assigned, even if, what they were doing was immoral and against the law. This was our law at the time. So the structure of law enforcement derives directly from that. And let's not forget that our law looked at black people as 3/5 of a human being. And let's not also forget that slavery was not outlawed. These are the same human beings that found it okay to do it as long as they benefited from it. The abolishment of slavery didn't come from an overall sense of morality or decency. It came from a lack of need. People found that the cotton gin was more time efficient and cost efficient than harboring slaves. The machine was, less of a liability. The machine wasn't going to die like people do. The machine didn't have to get fed, and the machine didn't require watchmen or housing, and so on and so forth. So there was overall not this wasn't coming from a sense of decency that somebody just woke up and said, "Oh, we've been being treacherous to people. Let's have like a moral awakening." No, this was an economic decision. This was a strictly economic decision. And I say this to say that can generally and widely be like applied and accepted, no matter how indecent or corrupt it may be morally, that people are really willing to go along with whatever is generally accepted. And so the idea of law, of law is living and breathing, because it's really a matter of what people are willing to accept. Because there are things that are outlawed now that were in legal accordance formally. And so I say this to say that just like the overseers of the plantation never once questioned when the slave masters told them to do something that was so despicable, our law enforcement replicates that identical behavior today, never questioning what they're doing is moral. You see, there's a fine line between what's immoral and illegal, and what's legal can change. And normally it doesn't change if there's not it doesn't change until there's not a fiscal need for it, which is why we've seen mass incarceration skyrocket. Some say a solution is hiring more law enforcement officers of color, and I say that that's not relevant. I don't think that that's the solution by any stretch of the imagination. Someone sharing another person's skin complexion has nothing to do with where their allegiance lies. I say that again. Someone sharing another skin complexion with another person has nothing to do with where their allegiance lies. And that's a horrible assumption. In a capitalistic society, someone's allegiance is with the person that writes their paycheck, not their race. So this is just optics. This is political optics. It's a political scheme to give people a sense of reassurance when they see law enforcement officers that are black or look like them. They know that the average person is going to get a sense of reassurance because the average person may be more comfortable with people that look like them. However, I'm letting you know that it should not be the way that you're thinking at all. Like I said, that used to be my mentality until I moved to DC. And then I saw and was around some real life black devils. Doesn't matter the race of people. It matters the mentality of people. And so when they know it's exclusively like a certain type of mentality that would even allow you to be a part of a police force regardless of your race, like the military, like when they're done training you, the indoctrination and the law enforcement culture will make you colorless. And this is intellectual laziness that they know that the masses carry. And so they know that this is something that they can do by going into poor communities, black communities, and having black cops. They know that most people will see that as a solution. But the fact is, black, white, Latin, Asian, these people are trained to shoot first and ask questions later. Generally, asking questions is shunned. And if you go in asking too many questions, consider yourself jobless when it comes to law enforcement. KRS-One, I don't know if you guys remember, whoop, whoop, that's the sound of the police. He had a song called Overseer, and it was a play of words, kind of like overseer, kind of sounds like officer. And he raps around the direct link between the overseer of the plantation and the officers of today. And, I'm going to go probably even more in depth at some point. I'm not here to pick apart Joe Biden. I'm not here to pick apart any people in politics because, again, I don't know these people. But, and in fact, God is my president. But I do believe that there's abuse of power going on a wide scale, and I believe that they're really banking on the ignorance of the people. And my experience here in Washington, D.C. has made that realization all more very clear to me. The idea of just targeting innocent civilians and using your taxpaying dollars, mind you, your taxpaying dollars to do it. We've had so many like celebrities. DMX, this was part of this whole thing. I mentioned this when he passed, that this man was being followed. This man was being watched, and this man was being followed by law enforcement under 24-hour surveillance of the CIA the FBI and law enforcement just because he was gifted? Just because he could rap really well? And we know that when it comes to drugs, yes, we know our brother DMX was struggling. This was something that he was dealing with. But we know that most of the drugs go to the suburbs. 60% of drugs go to the suburbs. So 60% of drug users are in suburbia. 40% are in the inner cities. Why isn't the FBI, the CIA, law enforcement, why aren't they watching the people in the suburbs 24/7? Your politician, your cokehead politician, why aren't they watching him 24/7, having him under a frivolous surveillance? And the bottom line is it's your tax-paying dollars that are paying these people to target non-criminals. This is entrapment. Watching somebody 24/7 trying to find criminal activity so they can get them on the back end, that's not the way it's supposed to work. Watching someone 24/7, having somebody under 24/7 surveillance so you can scrutinize them, watch their activity with a fine-tuned comb to try to get them on your tax-paying dime. And as much as these people love to talk about the poor and these social services and all of these things, who's feeding who? Because without the poor people, law enforcement wouldn't have a job. A lot of these politicians wouldn't have a job. They create problems to keep themselves employed. Think about it. If they're watching you 24/7, if they're over there overseeing, the officers overseeing your community, this is how they get paid. So without you, they wouldn't have a job. So who's feeding who, really? Who's leeching off of who? That's all for now as far as my opinion about this defund the police. I say do it. Do it. Peace.